The Great Silk Road. Mysteries and Fates of Caravans. Please, make yourself comfortable. Close your eyes if you wish, take a deep breath in and out. Allow yourself to briefly leave the noisy, fast-paced, anxious world in which we live. Today, I invite you on an unhurried, meditative journey deep into the centuries, to where, among silent sands and boundless steppes, under the starry sky of Asia, the Great Silk Road moved with slow, stubborn steps. A path not marked on maps with a single line. A path that, like a river, changed its course, scattered into thousands of streams, and gathered again into one flow. A path along which people, camels, horses, caravans, merchants, pilgrims, warriors, and dreamers walked for centuries. They carried not only silk and spices, but also stories, dreams, fears, love, and hope. Today, this path is hidden beneath sands, stones, and the asphalt of modern roads. The goods have long been unloaded, trading cities have turned into archaeological sites. But if you listen closely, if you dig beneath the hustle and bustle, you can hear the rustle of footsteps on sand, the crackling of a fire in the night, the distant tinkling of bells on a camel's neck. This story is not only about goods and riches. This is a story of human aspiration to connect worlds, cross deserts, overcome mountains, carry through millennia the whisper of ideas, the aroma of distant lands, and the feeling that somewhere beyond the horizon, there is always someone waiting for your arrival. Once, in the era of great empires, East and West were like two different worlds. Between them stretched deserts and mountains, rivers and steppes, dangers and the unknown. And yet, people stretched through this space a thread woven from will and curiosity, from thirst for profit and passion for novelty. The thread began in China, in the cities of the ancient Han Empire, where from silkworm cocoons was born the finest fabric, like a water surface. Silk was light and strong as a dream itself. Its price rivaled gold. From the Celestial Empire, caravans set out westward, passing the high mountains of Tian Shan, the deserts of Taklamakan, and waterless plateaus. But this path was not straight. It was like a net, embracing half the known world. Traders from Sogdiana and Bactria, Persian merchants and Arab intermediaries, Byzantine diplomats and Mongol khans all were part of this network. Their paths converged and diverged in cities and oases, in the noisy markets of Samarkand and Kashgar, in the caravanserais of Persia and Syria. The Great Silk Road was not only a road for goods. It was a road for ideas. Along it walked Buddhist monks and Christian missionaries, Muslim scholars and pagan shamans. Together with bales of silk and spices traveled tales and legends, technologies and religions, dreams and fears. But do not think this path was safe or simple. Behind each camel's step stood endless hours on the road, long nights under a cold sky, thirst, danger from bandits, disease, sandstorms. Caravans disappeared into oblivion, and their fates dissolved in the sands like raindrops. However, despite all this, the flow of people and goods did not cease for millennia. Caravans again and again set out on their journey. Each step, each merchant, each guard, each grain of sand in the desert part of this great, almost mythical journey. Today, in our world of digital technologies and instant communication, this path seems like a fairy tale. But it is in such fairy tales that truth about human nature lies, about how strongly we strive to seek the new, exchange knowledge, overcome boundaries. And today, in this lecture, I propose that you walk this path with me, unhurriedly, step by step, from the palaces of Chinese emperors to the markets of Damascus, from cold mountains to scorching steppes. We will listen to the rustle of silk, breathe in the aroma of eastern bazaars, look into the eyes of those who walked this path before us. Immerse yourself in this slow, gentle story. Let the voice and narrative carry you to a world where everything moves unhurriedly, where the past lives in every breath of wind, where night falls slowly like a silk veil. Because the Great Silk Road is not just a road, it is the eternal rhythm of the human soul that seeks, travels, connects. Now take one more deep breath, and let us set out on our journey. Chapter 1. Birth of the Path, the First Trade Routes. Once, many centuries ago, long before the first caravans stretched across sands and mountains, human feet already trod these lands. Hunters and gatherers, nomads and farmers walked here. Their trails were invisible, leaving behind only tracks on wet earth or a dusty trace in grass. But with each year, these trails became more worn, because humans from ancient times strived not only to live with thoughts, gifts, and hopes. The first beginnings of the future Great Road appeared long before anyone gave it a name. Scholars speak of the fact that already in the Bronze Age 3, maybe even 4,000 years ago, through the expanses of Central Asia passed trails connecting tribes and civilizations, not yet knowing the word trade in the way we understand it today. In those times, when there were no empires or maps, people exchanged what had value for them: flint, tools, ornaments from shells, rare stones, bronze items. Through boundless steppes, through gorges and rivers, not only objects were transmitted, but knowledge about other tribes, rumors. These trails were fragile, dependent on seasons, nomadic wars, and nature. But they became the first threads in the enormous tapestry that centuries later would receive the name of the Silk Road. Everything changed during the flowering period of one of the greatest empires of the ancient East, the Han Empire. This was an era when China began to look beyond its mountains and borders, when its rulers and traders first realized that beyond the horizon lay a huge, unexplored world full of opportunities and dangers. Historians point to the 2nd century BCE as the date of the official birth of the Great Silk Road. It was then that at the court of the Han Emperor Wu, a diplomat and scout named Zhang Qian was sent on a journey. His story itself resembles a legend. Zhang Qian spent years on the road, was held captive, wandered through unfamiliar lands, observed the life of tribes and kingdoms about which in the Celestial Empire no one had heard. He returned to the emperor exhausted but enriched with incredible knowledge. Far to the west lived peoples who had swift horses, countless herds, markets and warriors, goods and knowledge. His story became the spark that ignited in the Han Empire a thirst to expand horizons. Thus began the era when from the capital Chang'an the first organized caravans began to depart westward. The path was not a road for silk alone, but also for jade, paper, metals, horses, spices, furs and most importantly, ideas. The path was not straight. It branched. There were northern routes through steppes, southern routes through oases, mountain passages, river crossings. Dangers awaited at every turn, sandstorms in the Taklamakan Desert, icy wind of Tian Shan, scorching sun and waterless days. Each journey was a trial and at the same time hope, for a successful caravan brought not only wealth but new possibilities, new encounters, new knowledge. Gradually, along these routes began to appear caravanserais fortresses and inns for weary travelers and their animals. Small worlds in the midst of emptiness where people of different languages and customs met, where over a cup of tea one could hear news of distant lands. The Silk Road began with something simple, with the desire to exchange fabric for spices, a horse for jade. But over time, it became much more a road along which life itself, culture itself, was transmitted. These routes connected magnificent civilizations, China with its silk and porcelain, Persia with its carpets and frankincense, India with spices and gold, Bactria and Sogdiana which became crossroads of the world, Rome and Byzantium dreaming of eastern silks. Each of these civilizations wove its thread into the enormous tapestry of the road, and each intersection of roads was the beginning of a new story, a new friendship, and sometimes a new enmity. The path began small with the desire to exchange, with the desire to know, and with one single thought: what lies beyond the horizon? We are accustomed to thinking of great empires, golden coins, caravans stretched for kilometers. But at the beginning stood people. Simple people full of courage and fear. The first caravans were not large, these were modest groups of people, armed not only with goods but with patience, determination, and the ability to negotiate. They knew that between them and success lay everything: bandits, sandstorms, hunger, disease, and betrayal. But in each such caravan was something that cannot be bought or sold: the thirst for the road, the unquenchable desire to move forward despite everything. In those times, trade was not an abstract concept. Each good had its face. Behind each roll of silk stood the hands of weavers, behind each amphora of oil was peasant labor, behind each piece of jade were the hands of a master. Caravans carried not just things, they carried traces of life and faiths. And gradually, with each year, with each passing caravan, the path became more known, overgrown with routes. It could not be called straight, it meandered like a river, changed course, sometimes dried up, sometimes filled again. Traders adapted to circumstances, negotiated with new rulers, built temporary alliances, and lived in constant uncertainty. There appeared people for whom the road became not just work, but a way of life. Among them were the Sogdians, a people of Central Asia, often called the soul of the Silk Road. The Sogdians were born traders. They spoke several languages, knew how to negotiate with anyone, and moved between cultures as easily as between rooms. The Sogdians not only traded, they transferred ideas, music, myths. They knew the price of every word, every gesture, every glance. And in their palms, silk turned into gold. Together with them came others: Persians, Arabs, Greeks, Jews, Armenians, Indians. In this early period, the path was a place not only of trade but of danger. Caravans disappeared without a trace, entire parties of goods vanished in the sands. Some routes became impossible due to wars, bandits, or natural disasters. But always there were those who, despite everything, gathered caravans and set out on the long, endless journey. It was precisely in this early period that the atmosphere of the Great Silk Road formed as a road where everything is unstable, everything is impermanent, but everything is possible. A road where strangers become friends and an enemy might turn out to be a savior. A road where one sits by a fire in the middle of nowhere and hears a story from someone one would never have heard in another life. It was then, in this unstable, full of risk and hope time, that the Silk Road began writing its chapter in human history. A chapter in which there were no great battles and royal decrees, but there was the slow, stubborn tread of people changing the world with their journey. In the next chapters, we will follow them. We will learn how caravans were assembled, what they carried and what they risked. What peoples met at the crossroads of the world. We will see how this fragile trail became a road of civilizations. But for now, take a deep breath. Imagine yourself on the edge of a boundless desert. You feel wind, dust, and distant voices of a caravan. And you know the path is only beginning. Chapter 2, Geography and Routes of the Silk Road. Try for a moment to close your eyes and imagine before you a map of the ancient world. But not a map with clear lines of borders and country names, no. Imagine a map of sensations and landscapes. In the east, humid rice fields. A little further, mountains forever covered with snow. Beyond them, boundless steppes where wind sings its endless song. Further still, rocky deserts and oases. And finally, in the distance, the lands of Persia, the Middle East, the Mediterranean coast. This is the space of the Great Silk Road. It was not a straight line on a map, but a living network of roads, trails, and rivers connecting worlds that changed over time, expanded, disappeared, and arose anew. In history, things are rarely clear and straight. The Great Silk Road was precisely such a multitude of intertwining routes. There was no single main path. Historians conventionally divide routes into three main branches: northern, central, and southern. The northern route passed through steppes and foothills of Central Asia, connecting China with Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and further with the Black Sea coast. This path was shorter but more dangerous. Through it often passed nomads, herders, warriors whose raids could turn merchants' hopes to ashes in an instant. The central route, which over time became the most famous, passed through the Taklamakan Desert, the oases of Khotan and Kashgar, crossing the Pamir, Bactria, and further went toward Persia and the Middle East. This path was the longest and most saturated. On it appeared cities, oases, crossroads of civilizations where traders, diplomats, missionaries, warriors, and adventurers met. The southern route led through India, bypassing dangerous mountain passes and deserts. It was slower and longer but allowed avoiding some of the harshest conditions of Central Asia. Over time, these routes intertwined with sea roads passing through the Indian Ocean, Red Sea, and Mediterranean. Thus arose what historians would later call the Maritime Silk Road, a path for ships loaded with silk, spices, jade, and ceramics. However, geography was only one of the path's complexities. The nature of this world did not forgive mistakes. Caravans overcame the Taklamakan Desert, one of the harshest places on earth. Sand dunes here reach heights of 100 meters, and wind can swallow tracks and landmarks in hours. This place is still called You Enter and Don't Exit. Further, the road led to the mountains of Tian Shan and Pamir, high mountain passes where air is thin and night brings freezing cold. Here, among snowy peaks, the path lost many people and animals. No less dangerous were the steppes stretching from China's western borders to the Black Sea. In these lands lived nomadic tribes, quickly changing their alliances and enemies. Here there were no cities, only boundless expanses where an enemy could attack at any moment and a caravan could disappear without a trace. But despite all difficulties, despite the fact that the path could take months and even years, people continued to go. They were drawn forward not only by gold and silk, but by the road itself, the promise of meeting the unknown, another world. And it is precisely thanks to these routes, thanks to the perseverance and dreams of those who walked them, that East and West became not two closed worlds, but parts of a single pulsating space of exchange and communication. In the next chapters, we will see who exactly filled this path with love. Who gathered caravans, who built caravanserais, who risked life for a bale of silk and a few coins. But before we continue, take one more deep breath. Imagine yourself on one of these ancient routes. Perhaps on the edge of a desert where heat melts the air, or on a high mountain pass where snowy peaks rise into the heavens. The path awaits, and we go further. If you could rise above the earth and see the entire Silk Road from above, you would see not a line but a whole web of roads crossing continents. This web was alive, it changed over time, new notes appeared and old ones disappeared, like the breathing of a great, slow epoch. In some places, paths converged and formed great trading cities. These cities were like hearts pumping the blood of trade through the world. In Central Asia, such a city was Samarkand, the Pearl of Sogdiana, a city of domes and minarets, a crossroads where caravans from China, India, Persia, and Byzantium met. Here one could hear all the languages of the world, see all the goods of the earth. Another important node was Kashgar, an oasis at the foot of Tian Shan, a place where caravans divided, some went north, others south or west. In Kashgar, cultures, languages, and customs mixed. Here one could hear conversations in Sogdian and Persian, Chinese and Sanskrit. Along the path lay other cities, lesser known but no less significant: Khotan, Merv, Bokhara, Balkh. Each of them was like a pearl in the necklace of the road, a place where weary travelers could find food, shelter, and news about the world. But not only cities created the map of the road. Along the routes were located caravanserais, fortresses, inns where merchants and their animals could rest, repair wagons, water camels. These caravanserais were islands of safety in a sea of dangers. Their walls remembered the voices of merchants and pilgrims, soldiers and spies, philosophers and poets. The path was full not only of geographical borders but also of political ones. Different tribes and states established tolls, erected fortresses. Sometimes they blocked the road, sometimes the path flourished under the patronage of a strong and stable empire as, for example, during the time of the Han Dynasty or during the Mongol Empire. Sometimes it fell into desolation due to wars, raids, and internecine strife. But despite all this fragility, the Great Silk Road remained a road of life. It breathed together with the world. When some world wars flared, routes changed. When epidemics struck one city, merchants sought new trails. Over time, the path became not only land but also sea. From the ports of southern China, ships departed loaded with silk and spices. They sailed the waters of the South China Sea, the Indian Ocean, reaching Africa. Thus arose the Maritime Silk Road, a continuation of the great route that connected the world not only by land but by sea. Along it went goods, people, and ideas. But as on land, the sea was full of dangers, storms, pirates, diseases, and wars. Altogether, this formed what we call the Great Silk Road. When we speak of it, we speak not only of a map but of the inner geography of human spirit, of the aspiration to connect, to know, to overcome. And now, when we have outlined the map of this path, it is time to meet those who walked along it. Who gathered caravans, who carried on themselves the burden and hope of this road. In the next chapter, we will look into the lives of the people of the road: caravanners, merchants, wanderers, those who day after day walked through deserts and mountains. But for now, take a deep breath, feel under your feet the hot sand, hear the distant ringing of camel bells. The path continues. Chapter 3: Caravans and People of the Road. When we imagine the Great Silk Road, cities and goods appear before our eyes. But in truth, the soul of this road was people. Not great rulers and not merchants whose names enter chronicles, but those who day after day, step by step, moved across boundless expanses through sands, steppes, and mountains. These were caravanners, people of the road. A caravan is more than just a string of camels or wagons. It is a living organism that had its own rules, rhythm, and character. It was assembled with caution and calculation, knowing that any mistake on the road could cost lives. A caravan began with an idea and intention. Somewhere in the noisy city of Chang'an, Samarkand, or Bokhara, a merchant decided, it's time to set out. He hired guards, bought goods, gathered people. Sometimes these were caravans of dozens of camels, huge moving camps stretching for many kilometers. In the caravan, everyone had their place and task. There were merchants who invested money and counted on profit. There were caravan bashis, experienced guides who knew the roads, water sources, and dangers. There were guards, people with swords and bows who protected against bandits and predators. There were cooks, grooms, shepherds, hired workers. And of course, there were the animals themselves, camels, mules, sometimes horses and donkeys. Without them, the path would have been impossible. Camels were not just transport. They were companions, part of the caravan's soul. They patiently carried on themselves the weight of spices, precious stones, and human hopes. Gathering a caravan took weeks. It was necessary to calculate water and provisions, prepare bales of goods, negotiate with local rulers about tolls and safety. It was necessary to gather people ready to set out on a journey where each day could be the last. When the caravan left the city, it was a whole event. Crowds gathered, children waved their hands, old people watched with anxiety, for each departure was a risk. No one knew whether this caravan would return. The road was slow. In a day, a caravan covered 20 to 40 kilometers, sometimes less. They spent nights in the desert under the open sky by fires, sometimes in caravanserais strong walls where one could find a roof overhead and news of other paths. The caravan moved to the rhythm of nature. By day under the scorching sun or in the cold shadow of mountains. By night under the bottomless starry sky that seemed the eternal companion of every traveler. There were many dangers. On desert sections lurked thirst and death from exhaustion. In the mountains avalanches and cold. In the steppes raids by nomads. Sometimes a caravan disappeared without a trace, its remains found years later, buried under sands, forgotten. But there were other dangers too, diseases, fatigue, internal conflicts. A caravan was a living organism, and if strife began within it, the road became hell. Nevertheless, despite all trials, caravans continued their journey. Day after day, week after week, month after month. They were not just carriers of goods, they were the connecting link between worlds. In each caravan were also those who walked not for profit. There were pilgrims heading to holy places. There were spies and envoys hidden among traders. There were adventurers seeking a new life on the road. There were those who had no home and considered the road their only home. Their fates dissolved in the common rhythm of the road. Their faces changed, but the path remained. The caravan walked as centuries walked slowly, inexorably, eternally. They often say that the Great Silk Road was a road of trade. But if you listen to the rustle of history's pages, it becomes clear, this path was a road of human destinies. In each caravan sounded a polyphony of voices. There were Chinese and Sogdians, Persians and Indians, Arabs and Byzantines. Their languages differed, their customs were foreign to each other. But on the road, they all became part of one large mechanism, the caravan. In the evenings, when the heat subsided and fires illuminated faces, the caravan came alive and began to tell stories. Some spoke of distant cities full of gold and temples. Others of native lands, of family left behind. Sometimes songs sounded drawn out, sad, full of longing and hope. Sometimes only the crackling of fire and the heavy breathing of camels. In these night conversations was born a special culture of the road. It had no writing or laws, but in it was more humanity than in any library. This was a culture of trust and caution, of gestures and glances, of mutual aid and constant vigilance. On the road, boundaries between people were erased. At stopping places, a Persian merchant could share water with a Sogdian drover, a Chinese master could patch equipment for a poor pilgrim, a Sogdian caravanbashi could let on the road someone who had not a coin left. Here, at nameless stops, under a starry sky, bonds were forged that knew no borders. And yet the road was full of dangers. Sometimes danger came from within the caravan. Discontent, fatigue, fear sometimes led to quarrels and splits. Sometimes merchants hired guards, but the guards themselves could become bandits if they saw easy prey. Outside awaited other threats. Nomadic tribes watched caravans, waiting for a convenient moment to attack. Sandstorms could cover the path so suddenly that the caravan lost its way. Diseases spread quickly, and in remote deserts, no one could help. And still, people walked. Caravans gathered again and again. In each was something greater than trade, it was the movement of life itself. The path became home for those who did not seek peace, for those who knew that the road never ends. Thousands of people, thousands of faiths, thousands of stories remained under the sands, in the shadows of mountains, in the dust of steppes. They did not enter chronicles, their names are forgotten. But their steps were those very ones that built the Great Silk Road. And if you tonight close your eyes and listen, perhaps you will hear this rhythm, the steps of a caravan, the distant ringing of bells, the rustle of voices by a fire. The path continues. In the next chapter, we will learn for what they walked. What was the silk, what treasures filled the bales, and why people were ready to risk their lives for this. But for now, take a deep breath. Imagine yourself a traveler in the middle of the desert. Wind sings over the dunes, night descends softly and slowly. The path awaits. Chapter 4. The Great Exchange. What the caravans carried. The Great Silk Road was more than just a road. It was an artery through which for centuries flowed not only people but wealth, knowledge, tastes, aromas, technologies, and dreams. Caravans carried on their backs treasures of East and West, changing the world imperceptibly to themselves. If you could look into the baggage of one of those caravans that slowly stretched across the desert, you would see an amazing world. First of all, of course, silk, the fabric for which the path received its name. Thin, almost weightless, shimmering in the sun's rays like water. In China, silk was known and revered from ancient times. The secret of its production was guarded most strictly. For the export of silkworm cocoons or knowledge of production, death was the penalty. But silk still found its way west. Its threads stretched through mountains and deserts, crossed rivers and borders, fell into the hands of merchants, diplomats, kings. In the Roman Empire, silk cost more than gold, and senators sometimes condemned the fashion for indecently transparent Eastern fabrics. But even Roman moralists could not stop fashion. The desire to touch silky, cool fabric crossed any laws. Besides silk, caravans carried jade green, dense, heavy as the earth itself. In China, jade was revered as the stone of emperors, a symbol of virtue and strength. It was carved into jewelry, vessels, ritual objects. No less valuable were spices, pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, saffron, and cloves filled caravan sacks with the aromas of distant countries. In Europe, these spices were literally worth their weight in gold. They not only added flavor to food but were considered medicines, talismans, symbols of status. Spices were not just goods, they were messengers of other worlds, fragrances of countries about which legends circulated in Europe. Caravans also carried precious stones, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, turquoise, carnelian, pearls. They shimmered in the sun, attracting the attention of monarchs and the wealthy. From China came paper and porcelain, later printing technologies and compass production. In exchange, they brought west glass and silver from Persia and Rome, carpets and fabrics from Central Asia, wine, oil, and incense. But perhaps the most valuable cargo was not things but ideas. Caravans were moving libraries where, together with goods, traveled languages, religions, legends, music. Through the Silk Road, the world learned of Buddhism, which, together with monks and pilgrims, spread to China from India. Along the same roads went Christian missionaries and Muslim merchants, carrying their teachings. Through caravans were transmitted technologies, secrets of metallurgy, irrigation methods, medicine recipes. It was along the Silk Road that knowledge of gunpowder, the compass, and paper money spread, discoveries that would later change the world. But the road was not only a road of goods and knowledge. It was a road of rumors and fears, hopes and dreams. Caravans became carriers of stories, exaggerations, myths. At stops by fires, one could hear tales of distant kings and unseen riches. People told of desert monsters, of countries ruled by women, of peoples with dog heads. These stories traveled together with goods, filling the world with mysteries and fantasies. Each bale of silk, each amphora of wine, each bag of saffron was more than just a commodity. They were particles of a great exchange that changed fates. In the next part of this chapter, we will see what faiths and what ideas move together with goods. Because sometimes it is precisely what cannot be seen or bought that became the most important cargo of the Great Silk Road. Sometimes it seems that the Great Silk Road was a road of material treasures, fabrics, stones, incense. But if you listen carefully, it becomes clear, the real exchange took place not in bags and bales, but in the minds and hearts of those who walked the road. Together with goods, caravans transferred ideas and knowledge, creating a network that connected worlds. One of the most amazing goods of the road was writing and language. Along the route spread the Sogdian language, the language of merchants and intermediaries, which became a kind of lingua franca of Asia. So widespread was the influence of this culture of trade and dialogue. Through caravans also went religions. Eastward rushed rumors of a new teaching, Buddhism. In cities and oases appeared the first Buddhist monasteries where travelers could find shelter and hear stories of rebirth and the path to enlightenment. Westward, along the same roads, went stories of Confucius and Laozi. The first Christian missionaries carried their word to Asia. A special place was occupied by Islam, which, together with Arab merchants and diplomats, spread in Central Asia, found its way to the steppes and mountains, to nomadic tribes. Trade and faith went hand in hand. But not only words and ideas moved along the road. With caravans also went diseases. Historians note that it was along trade roads that plague, smallpox, and other epidemics spread. Caravanserais, markets, crowds of people became an ideal environment for diseases that crossed continents just like spices and silk. And yet, despite dangers, the exchange continued. Because people walking the road always sought not only profit but new knowledge, a new sense of the world. In the markets of Samarkand, one could see how side by side stood goods and people from the most distant corners of the earth, silk and silver, Persian carpets and Indian spices, glass from Syria and porcelain from China. These were not just goods, they were fragments of the world gathered together to show how great and diverse the world was. Special mention deserves living cargo, horses, camels, hogs for hunting, dogs of rare breeds. Sometimes along the road were even transported exotic animals, peacocks, monkeys, exotic cats that became decorations of the courts of great rulers. But perhaps the strangest and rarest cargo was people. On the road moved not only merchants and guards. Sometimes caravans transported slaves, prisoners, hostages. Their fates dissolved in the endless road, becoming part of the great mechanism of trade. And yet, among this flow of objects and fates was something that could not be touched or bought. Caravans carried with them a sense of the world's connectedness. A person standing in a market in Ctesiphon, holding in their hands silk from Chang'an, inhaling the aroma of Persian incense, listening to Sogdian music, discussing with a Byzantine diplomat in this was something magical. A sense that the world is not limited by borders, that beyond the horizon there is always something new, and everything is connected. Caravans walked for centuries, and each of them brought not only bales and boxes but the memory of worlds. The Great Silk Road became a road along which the world learned itself. In the next chapters, we will see how these ideas and cultures mixed, what religions and philosophies met at the crossroads of the world, and what price people paid for this. But for now, take a deep breath. Imagine yourself at an Eastern bazaar, the chime of voices, the iridescent rustle of fabrics. Imagine a caravan carrying beyond the horizon treasures and dreams. The path continues. Chapter 4, Continued, Hidden Cargoes of the Road. When we speak of the Great Silk Road, most often we remember silk, spices, jade, and porcelain. But like any road connecting such different worlds, the path kept within itself also what rarely made it into chronicles: hidden cargoes, special goods about which they spoke in whispers by fires. They did not adorn markets and were not entered in toll lists, but they went along the same roads, accompanying caravans, dissolving in their dust and night silence. In each caravan, among rolls of silk and amphoras of wine, among precious stones and ceramics, were also other goods. Medicines and potions, powders, extracts of plants that today we would call psychoactive substances. These cargoes were not something forbidden or condemned. In those times, they were considered not only food and goods but a way to ease pain, calm anxiety, forget grief. Along the road went opium resin extracted from poppies, used for centuries as medicine for pain and insomnia. In Persia and Central Asia, they knew recipes for tinctures and ointments with opium. It was transported as a medicinal remedy and as a commodity for nobility. In China, its use became part of court life long before it turned into an empire's problem. Cannabis, its seeds, oils, and dried leaves were also found in caravan baggage. In Central Asia and the East, they knew of its properties, used it for medicinal and ritual purposes, added it to incense and infusions. Dubious powders and resins from India, Tibet, Persia, plants whose leaves or roots were used in rituals and medicines. Sage, wild mint, exotic roots. Some of them acted soothingly, others stimulatingly or hallucinogenically. Psychoactive incense of the world, frankincense, nutmeg, Damascus rose, saffron. All these were not only aromas for temples and palaces. Many of these substances in large doses caused changes in perception, induced a light trance state. They were used by priests, poets, rulers in search of inspiration and revelations. Alcohol, wine, mead, intoxicating drinks. Caravans transported amphoras and wineskins with wines from the Mediterranean, Persia, and Central Asia. For many peoples of the road, this was an integral part of life and rituals. Finally, along the paths went magical recipes, herbals, lists of poisons and potions that were passed from hand to hand, from healers to alchemists, from monasteries to secret societies. These cargoes went invisibly, quietly, but they were part of the great exchange. In some oases, caravans met with shamans and herbalists who knew which roots to add to tea to see prophetic dreams. In other places, travelers could buy powders and ointments to ease pain, forget longing, silence anxiety. On the road, psychoactive goods were a kind of invisible currency of the path. They were sold and bought, given and transmitted as signs of trust and friendship. Sometimes they were used for healing, sometimes for entertainment, sometimes seeking answers to questions born in the night silence of the desert. But like everything on this road, they were not only goods but part of the great story of human search, the search for meaning, for exit beyond the ordinary. Historians rarely mention these cargoes in chronicles of names and dates. They are lost like dust under caravan feet. But if you listen, if you look behind the facade of great deals and empires, you can hear the whisper of those who carried with them not only silk and spices but forgotten recipes, herbs, and potions bearing their secrets. The Silk Road was always more than just a road. It was a road of desires and hopes, fears and searches. A road along which people sought not only wealth but answers. In the next chapters, we will continue this path and see how empires themselves and wars influenced the fate of the road. But for now, knowing what hidden cargoes caravans carried, you will see the path differently. Take a deep breath. Imagine a fire in the night desert, a cup with steaming brew, a healer's whisper under the stars. The path continues. Chapter 5. The Spiritual Caravan Exchange of Religions and Cultures. When we speak of the Great Silk Road, we involuntarily imagine the glitter of gold and the smell of spices. But this path was a road not only of goods. Much more important than what was transported in bales and boxes were the ideas and beliefs that traveled with caravans, invisible but tangible. They penetrated cities and people's hearts, changing the world far more strongly than silk. The road of goods that connected East and West became not only a trade corridor but a corridor of cultures, religions, myths, and philosophies. Through it for centuries went a great spiritual exchange. Travelers of the road carried within themselves far more than just merchant interest. Together with caravans went pilgrims, missionaries, sages, philosophers, and sometimes simply seekers. And they carried not bales of fabrics but words and knowledge that could change the consciousness of entire peoples. One of the first and most noticeable spiritual flows that went along the Silk Road was the spread of Buddhism. Buddhism rose in India in the 6th-5th centuries BC, but within several centuries it overcame the borders of its homeland and rushed north and east to Central Asia and China. This path of enlightenment coincided with caravan routes. Buddhist monks traveled together with traders, using caravans as a means of transport and protection. They walked from India through Bactria and Chinese mountain passes, carrying with them scrolls, Buddha statues, stories of the path to nirvana. At road crossroads began to appear Buddhist monasteries. In oases by roads, next to caravanserais, these monasteries became places not only of prayer but of communication, learning, exchange of knowledge. Travelers stopped in them to rest and listen to monks' teachings. Buddha's words spread across Asia precisely thanks to these humble and persistent wonders. Buddhism's ideas penetrated China, giving birth to a special direction Chuan Buddhism, which later in Japan became known as Zen. But Buddhism was not the only religion carried by caravans. In parallel, along the same roads moved missionaries of Eastern Christianity. In the 5th-7th centuries, when the Christian world had already split, Eastern Christian communities Nestorians set out eastward. They built churches and schools in Persia, Sogdiana, even reached China, where they left traces of their culture. In Central Asia were found inscriptions and crosses dating to the 7th-9th centuries, traces of those first Christian missionaries whose voices sounded in the desert next to voices of Buddhist monks and Sogdian merchants. And of course, one of the most powerful cultural forces that moved along the Silk Road was Islam. After the emergence of Islam in the 7th century, Muslim merchants and preachers began actively using caravan routes to spread their faith. They went from Arabia and Persia towards Central Asia and China, establishing mosques. Muslim merchants did not separate trade and religion. For them, a deal was an act not only material but spiritual. In each new deal, in each word went a call to Allah. In each new market a new opportunity to spread the faith. Along the road also went Manichaeans and Zoroastrians and followers of other ancient cults. Sometimes their teachings died in the deserts, sometimes found soil and took root. But the most amazing thing was how these cultures and religions mixed. In cities and oases, one could meet people for whom there were no rigid boundaries between religions. A Sogdian merchant could wear an amulet with Buddha's image, profess Zoroastrianism, while respecting Islamic trade laws. In Kashgar and Samarkand, in one bazaar could stand mosques, Buddhist stupas, Christian churches, and pagan shrines. People lived side by side, argued, traded, married, exchanged holidays and traditions. The Great Silk Road became the first model in history of a multicultural world. In a world where no one spoke of globalization, it already existed in each city, and by each fire occurred a dialogue of civilizations. And although this dialogue was not always peaceful, sometimes new religions were perceived as threats, sometimes followers of different faiths clashed. Caravans again and again gathered and went forward, carrying with them words, faith, and hope. In the next part of this chapter, we will look deeper into the daily life of these people, into how communication between cultures looked, how their disputes and holidays sounded, how caravans connected people not only with goods but with meanings. But now take a deep breath. Imagine how you sit by a fire in one of the caravanserais, listening to a debate between a monk and a merchant, watching as on the horizon flicker the lights of the next caravan. The path continues. If you could be transported to a crossroads of caravan roads somewhere in Samarkand or Balkh in the 7th or 8th century, you would see not only goods but a crossroads of faiths and worldviews. Here, among the hubbub of markets, smells of roasted meat and spices, among multicolored fabrics and voices in dozens of languages, the world mixed, and from this mixing was born something new. In caravanserais, after a hard day, by fires gathered the most diverse people: a Buddhist pilgrim, a Persian merchant, an Arab sage, a Saudian with gifts, books, amulets, prayers. These conversations, happening by chance on the road, sometimes changed people's views more strongly than armies and laws. Caravanserais were universities without walls and diplomas. Here they studied each other, delving into neighbors' customs and beliefs. People learned tolerance not from idealism but because otherwise it was impossible to survive on the road. But sometimes this spiritual exchange turned into secret, almost magical intertwinings of ideas. One such example was the spread along the road of Manichaeism, a religion founded in the 3rd century in Persia by the prophet Mani. Manichaeans taught of the struggle of light and darkness, of the eternal choice between good and evil. Their teaching absorbed elements of Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Buddhism, and spread along all roads of the path from Central Asia to China. In Chinese chronicles, mentions of Manichaean books copied with gold on purple silk are preserved. In the sands of Turfan, archaeologists found fragments of Manichaean texts, paintings, hymns. Sometimes religions that met on the road merged into unexpected forms. In some cities of Central Asia, images are found where Buddha neighbors with Zoroastrian fire symbols or Christian crosses. These were not only symbols but reflections of real life where faith was flexible and fluid like the roads of the path themselves. The Great Silk Road became a space where boundaries between one's own and foreign blurred. On the road, it was impossible to remain completely isolated. Any religion, any custom here was subject to neighbors' influence, and this influence changed everyone. Sometimes even great powers could not resist this exchange. Chinese emperors received Nestorian missionaries at their court, Persian shahs patronized pilgrims, even Mongol khans, who became masters of the entire path in the 13th century, allowed caravans and religions to freely cross their lands. However, the spiritual caravan of the road was not always peaceful. There were also religious conflicts, times when one faith supplanted another, when Buddhist temples were destroyed and mosques erected in their place, when missionaries perished in the steppes and their books were burned. But despite this, the main law of the road remained the same: movement and exchange. In each city, in each bazaar, under each tent sounded voices not similar to each other but still finding a common language. This exchange occurred for centuries, through generations. But it was precisely it that created that special fabric of Eurasia's cultural map that we see to this day. And today, if you come to Samarkand, Bokhara, or Kashgar, you will see in the faces of local residents, in architecture, in songs and legends, traces of that great invisible caravan that for centuries carried not only silk but stories, faith, music, language. The Great Silk Road taught people not only to trade but to listen to each other. In the next chapters, we will see how empires and wars influenced the fate of the road, how its routes changed, how cities rose and fell, how the history of trade roads was woven into the history of peoples. But for now, take a deep breath. Imagine yourself at a bazaar in one of the oases, among multicolored turbans and voices in dozens of languages. The path continues. Chapter 6: Empires and Politics of the Road. Above the boundless expanses of Eurasia, over them like the sky, changed epochs and rulers. The Great Silk Road never existed by itself. Its fate was inseparably linked with great empires, with kings' and emperors' ambitions, with raids and wars, with the rise and fall of states. If the road is an artery, then the political map was its pulse. And each time empires rose or fell, the heart of the road beat differently. At the very beginning of the road stood the Han Empire, a mighty state that unified China and opened the world to its merchants and envoys. It was precisely under Emperor Wu that caravans first began to go westward under the protection of Chinese banners. Han armies paved the road through hostile steppes, built fortifications, concluded treaties with tribes. For Han China, the Great Silk Road was not only a trade channel but a strategic corridor. With the help of the road, they could receive from Western tribes war horses, priceless for war with nomads, and rare goods and knowledge. But as soon as the Han Empire's power weakened, the road became more dangerous. In the north and west rose nomadic peoples Xiongnu, Wusun, Turks who controlled the steppes and demanded their share from caravans. Sometimes they became allies, sometimes bandits. At the same time, control over the western part of the route was held by Parthia, and then Sassanid Persia. These powers controlled the western part of the route and waged constant wars with Rome and Byzantium, sometimes interrupting the flow of goods and people. The road lived and breathed in time with these wars. When armies clashed in Mesopotamia, trade froze. When peace treaties were concluded, caravans again set out. In the 6th-7th centuries, the world entered a new era. Byzantium and Sassanid Persia competed for control of eastern routes. Byzantine merchants dreamed of gaining access to Chinese silk directly, but Parthians and Persians tried to maintain control over trade. There is a beautiful and mysterious story of how Byzantine Emperor Justinian I in the 6th century managed to obtain the secret of Chinese silk. Legend says that 2 Nestorian monks who had been to China secretly exported silkworm cocoons in hollow reeds and brought them to Constantinople. Thus began Byzantium's own silk production, and one of the road's main monopolies was shaken. But while Eastern empires fought for markets, in the north and east a new force was maturing: Turkic Khaganates. These nomadic powers subdued enormous spaces of Central Asia and became new masters of the steppes. Their attitude toward the road was ambivalent. They protected caravans receiving tolls, but could also attack if they wanted to strengthen their influence. It seemed destruction and war should have destroyed the caravans of the road. But the opposite happened. After devastating campaigns, after the conquest of cities and peoples, the Mongols unexpectedly became guarantors of the Great Road's safety. Historians call this time Pax Mongolica, Mongol Peace. Plague epidemic that broke out in Central Asia and soon spread across the entire Eurasian continent, reaching Europe in 1347. It is believed that it was precisely along trade routes, along those very caravan roads, that the disease reached the Mediterranean. For centuries, people sought wealth and knowledge on the road, but now the road brought death, the epidemic claimed, according to various estimates, up to half of Europe's population and a significant part of Asia's population. Cities emptied, caravans became rare, merchants feared traveling, markets emptied. After the epidemic, the world changed. The political map of Central Asia again became patchwork. The Mongol Empire disintegrated, its descendants waged wars with each other, and new states could not ensure caravan safety. In the steppes again appeared bandits. Some cities, once lively nodes of the Silk Road, became ruins. Caravanserais emptied and were destroyed. Caravans shrank, routes became increasingly dangerous, but epidemics and wars were only part of the decline. From the east came a new challenge. In the 15th century in China, replacing the Mongol Yuan dynasty came the Ming dynasty. The new rulers were suspicious of the outside world. They strengthened border control, reduced the number of trade missions, began building new fortifications and limiting foreign trade. On the other side, on western borders, the Ottomans were strengthening, who captured Constantinople in 1453. They also controlled key sections of trade routes, introduced new tolls and restrictions, but the most destructive for the Silk Road's fate was not even this. The real end came from the sea. In 1498, Portuguese navigator Vasco da Gama rounded Africa and reached India's shores. The sea route about which merchants and kings dreamed for centuries became reality. From this moment, goods that were previously carried through steppes and deserts began to sail by sea. This was simpler, faster, cheaper. On a ship, one could deliver tons of silk and spices in months, not years. It was not necessary to pay tolls to dozens of princes and risk life in deserts. Gradually, trade moved to ocean routes. The Great Silk Road became obsolete. Cities that for centuries prospered thanks to caravans fell into decline. Travelers who came to Samarkand or Bukhara in the 16th-17th centuries found half-destroyed walls and emptied bazaars. Caravanserais stood abandoned. Dusty roads along which for centuries people and goods walked were overgrown with grass, but the road disappeared not only physically. Together with it went an entire era. This was an era of slow, thoughtful movement. An era when goods and ideas traveled overland, from hand to hand, from city to city. An era when trade was not only economics but communication, meeting, dialogue. With sea routes came speed, but the magic of caravans disappeared. Night stops by fires in the steppe disappeared, slow conversations in caravanserais. Humanity entered a new era, an era of global empires and maritime trade, but the memory of the road remained. Even when the last caravans left Central Asian cities, stories of the Great Silk Road continued to live in legends and books, in songs and ruins, in the rustle of wind. In the next part of this chapter, we will talk about the last caravans, about forgotten cities, about how the memory of the road lived in people's hearts despite the fact that the road itself disappeared. But for now, take a deep breath. Imagine the faded walls of Samarkand, empty bazaars, and wind carrying the dust of roads along which no one walks anymore. The path is not yet finished. When they speak of the Great Silk Road, most often they remember the era of flowering, lively Samarkand bazaars, endless caravans in the desert, meetings of people and cultures. But like everything in this world, the road had its end. And this end was long and melancholic. After sea routes took the upper hand and main trade went to ships, along old roads still continued to go individual caravans. People by habit, by necessity, and sometimes by stubbornness continued to move. Through steppes in deserts, these last caravans were no longer those magnificent processions of hundreds of camels and people. These were small groups of traders seeking the shadow of former greatness. They knew that the road's time had passed, but the road remained part of their life. Their fate, in cities and oases, still stood half-destroyed caravanserais. Their walls remembered the sounds of voices in dozens of languages, the aroma of spices, and the heat of fires. Now in these walls spent nights few travelers or nomads. Dust and wind filled empty rooms. Some cities completely disappeared. Oases that for centuries supported caravans dried up. Land emptied. In place of noisy markets grew grass and thorns, but the memory of the road did not die. In legends and tales, in old people's stories, were preserved stories of that time when the Silk Road connected worlds. These stories were passed from mouth to mouth, like the whisper of a departed era. Sometimes travelers, having lost their way, found in the steppe ruins of old inns. Among debris, one could find shards of Chinese porcelain, rusty coins, faded pieces of fabric. These small finds were echoes of past greatness, proof that once here life boiled, and yet, even in the period of final decline, the road continued to influence people's fates. In the 15th-18th centuries, individual sections of the Silk Road were used as local trade routes. Local merchants drove livestock, sold textiles, spices, artisans' products. The Great Road no longer united civilizations but remained part of regional life. At this time, some rulers of Central Asia tried to revive the road's former significance. They built fortresses, restored markets, invited merchants. But the world had changed. Great empires, whose interests crossed on the Silk Road, no longer existed. A new era had come, an era of factories and colonies, steamships and railways. The caravan lost its economic power but acquired new significance, cultural and symbolic. In the 19th century, European researchers, archaeologists, and travelers began seeking the road's forgotten cities. They excavated ruins, deciphered inscriptions, sought in sense traces of the civilization that for centuries connected worlds. Some of them, like pilgrims, walked in caravans' footsteps not for trade but for knowledge. Their diaries and maps revived interest in the Great Silk Road, reminded the world that once here passed a road that changed human history, and even today, in Central Asian steppes, among Pamir mountain passes, or in old cities' dusty alleys, you can still see traces of the road. In Samarkand and Bukhara still sung songs mentioning merchants and caravans. In Kashgar, one can find old caravanserais where walls remember voices of people from all corners of the earth. In Taklamakan Sands, archaeologists still find scrolls and artifacts forgotten for centuries. The Great Silk Road disappeared as a trade road but remained as memory and myth. It became a symbol of the fact that people are capable of overcoming boundaries, building bridges between cultures, seeking common ground among differences. Today, along these routes again walk travelers, archaeologists, tourists. But they seek not goods and not profit. They seek echoes of the past, stories of a time when people walked toward each other through deserts, mountains, and centuries. In the next chapter, we will talk about what trace the Silk Road left in culture, architecture, myths, and our dreams of distant roads. But for now, take a deep breath. Imagine the last caravans going beyond the horizon, road dust, rustle of steps, last reflections of a great era. The path has ended, but the story continues. Chapter 7. Decline and Disappearance of the Silk Road. All roads have an end. Even those that seem eternal. The Great Silk Road, which for centuries connected east and west, slowly faded like a fire in the steppe when travelers disperse and night again becomes dark and empty. This decline was not sudden. It came gradually, like morning fog hiding familiar outlines. After the era of the Mongol Empire and temporary prosperity in the 13th-14th centuries, the road began to lose its strength. The first blow was the Black Death, a plague epidemic that broke out in Central Asia and soon spread across the entire Eurasian continent, reaching Europe in 1347. It is believed that it was precisely along trade routes, along those very caravan roads, that the disease reached the Mediterranean. For centuries, people sought wealth and knowledge on the road, but now the road brought death. The epidemic claimed, according to various estimates, up to half of Europe's population and a significant part of Asia's population. Cities emptied, caravans became rare, merchants feared traveling, markets emptied. After the epidemic, the world changed. The political map of Central Asia again became patchwork. The Mongol Empire disintegrated, its descendants waged wars with each other, and new states could not ensure caravan safety. In the steppes again appeared bandits. Some cities, once lively nodes of the Silk Road, became ruins. Caravanserais emptied and were destroyed. Caravans shrank, routes became increasingly dangerous. But epidemics and wars were only part of the decline. From the east came a new challenge. In the 15th century in China, replacing the Mongol Yuan dynasty came the Ming dynasty. The new rulers were suspicious of the outside world. They strengthened border control, reduced the number of trade missions, began building new fortifications and limiting foreign trade. On the other side, on western borders, the Ottomans were strengthening, who captured Constantinople in 1453. They also controlled key sections of trade routes, introduced new tolls and restrictions. But the most destructive for the Silk Road's fate was not even this. The real end came from the sea. In 1498, Portuguese navigator Vasco da Gama rounded Africa and reached India's shores. The sea route about which merchants and kings dreamed for centuries became reality. From this moment, goods that were previously carried through steppes and deserts began to sail by sea. This was simpler, faster, cheaper. On a ship, one could deliver tons of silk and spices in months, not years. It was not necessary to pay tolls to dozens of princes and risk life in deserts. Gradually, trade moved to ocean routes. The Great Silk Road became obsolete. Cities that for centuries prospered thanks to caravans fell into decline. Travelers who came to Samarkand or Bukhara in the 16th-17th centuries found half-destroyed walls and empty bazaars. Caravanserais stood abandoned. Dusty roads along which for centuries people and goods walked were overgrown with grass. But the road disappeared not only physically. Together with it went an entire era. This was an era of slow, thoughtful movement. An era when goods and ideas traveled overland, from hand to hand, from city to city. An era when trade was not only economics but communication, meeting, dialogue. With sea routes came speed, but the magic of caravans disappeared. Night stops by fires in the steppe disappeared, slow conversations in caravanserais. Humanity entered a new era, an era of global empires and maritime trade. But the memory of the road remained. Even when the last caravans left Central Asian cities, stories of the Great Silk Road continued to live in legends and books, in songs and ruins, in the rustle of wind. In the next part of this chapter, we will talk about the lost caravans, about forgotten cities, about how the memory of the road lived in people's hearts despite the fact that the road itself disappeared. But for now, take a deep breath. Imagine the faded walls of Samarkand, empty bazaars, and wind carrying the dust of roads along which no one walks anymore. The path is not yet finished. When they speak of the Great Silk Road, most often they remember the era of flowering, lively Samarkand bazaars, endless caravans in the desert, meetings of people and cultures. But like everything in this world, the road had its end. And this end was long and melancholic. After sea routes took the upper hand and main trade went to ships, along old roads still continued to go individual caravans. People by habit, by necessity, and sometimes by stubbornness continued to move through steppes and deserts. These last caravans were no longer those magnificent processions of hundreds of camels and people. These were small groups of traders seeking the shadow of former greatness. They knew that the road's time had passed, but the road remained part of their life, their fate. In cities and oases still stood half-destroyed caravanserais. Their walls remembered the sounds of voices in dozens of languages, the aroma of spices, and the heat of fires. Now in these walls spent nights few travelers or nomads. Dust and wind filled empty rooms. Some cities completely disappeared. Oases that for centuries supported caravans dried up. Land emptied. In place of noisy markets grew grass and thorns. But the memory of the road did not die. In legends and tales, in old people's stories, were preserved stories of that time when the Silk Road connected worlds. These stories were passed from mouth to mouth, like the whisper of a departed era. Sometimes travelers, having lost their way, found in the steppe ruins of old inns. Among debris, one could find shards of Chinese porcelain, rusty coins, faded pieces of fabric. These small finds were echoes of past greatness, proof that once here life boiled. And yet, even in the period of final decline, the road continued to influence people's fates. In the 15th-18th centuries, individual sections of the Silk Road were used as local trade routes. Local merchants drove livestock, sold textiles, spices, artisans' products. The Great Road no longer united civilizations but remained part of regional life. At this time, some rulers of Central Asia tried to revive the road's former significance. They built fortresses, restored markets, invited merchants. But the world had changed. Great empires, whose interests crossed on the Silk Road, no longer existed. A new era had come, an era of factories and colonies, steamships and railways. The caravan lost its economic power but acquired new significance, cultural and symbolic. In the 19th century, European researchers, archaeologists, and travelers began seeking the road's forgotten cities. They excavated ruins, deciphered inscriptions, sought incense traces of the civilization that for centuries connected worlds. Some of them, like pilgrims, walked in caravans' footsteps not for trade but for knowledge. Their diaries and maps revived interest in the Great Silk Road, reminded the world that once here passed a road that changed human history. And even today, in Central Asian steppes, among Pamir mountain passes, or in old cities' dusty alleys, you can still see traces of the road. In Samarkand and Bukhara still sung songs mentioning merchants and caravans. In Kashgar, one can find old caravanserais where walls remember voices of people from all corners of the earth. In Taklamakan sands, archaeologists still find scrolls and artifacts forgotten for centuries. The Great Silk Road disappeared as a trade road but remained as memory and myth. It became a symbol of the fact that people are capable of overcoming boundaries, building bridges between cultures, seeking common ground among differences. Today, along these routes again walk travelers, archaeologists, tourists. But they seek not goods and not profit. They seek echoes of the past, stories of a time when people walked toward each other through deserts, mountains, and centuries. In the next chapter, we will talk about what trace the Silk Road left in culture, architecture, myths, and our dreams of distant roads. But for now, take a deep breath. Imagine the last caravans going beyond the horizon, road dust, rustle of steps, last reflections of a great era. The path has ended, but the story continues. Chapter 8, Trace in History and Culture. The Great Silk Road long ago disappeared from maps. Caravans no longer stretch their endless strings of camels through deserts and steppes. City walls have collapsed, caravanserais have become ruins. But the road's history did not disappear. It remained in human memory, in culture, in language, in architecture, in songs and legends. Each stone, each trail along which caravans passed, became part of a large invisible map inscribed in Eurasian people's consciousness. The Silk Road left a trace first of all in cities. Many modern cities of Central Asia, China, the Middle East grew and flourished precisely thanks to this road. Samarkand, Bukhara, Kashgar, Khotan, Merv, Nishapur, Tbilisi, Trebizond all owe their existence and cultural wealth to times when caravans passed through them. These cities became crossroads of worlds. Here East and West, North and South met. Here architectural styles absorbing influences of different cultures were born. Minarets and pagodas, domes and arches, patterned mosaics and carved portals, all this is the road's heritage, captured in stone. But the road's trace was not only in walls. It remained in languages and traditions. Thousands of words in Turkic, Persian, Chinese, and European languages go back to times of the Silk Road. Names of goods, city names, measures of weight and money, gastronomic dishes and technologies, all this is evidence of old roads. In songs and tales of Central Asia to this day are preserved stories of merchants, wanderers, bandits, and the great road leading through boundless lands. These stories know no authors, they were told by fires, passed from father to son, whispered by travelers in caravanserais. Many legends and myths preserved traces of those times. In China, they told of mysterious Western countries where people lived with eyes on their chests. In Europe, circulated rumors of the distant Great Khan, ruler of the East commanding countless riches. These legends fed curiosity and became one of the engines of the era of great geographical discoveries. The Silk Road left a trace also in cuisine. As caravans advanced, spices, grains, recipes, and even cooking methods were transmitted from one culture to another. Rice and noodles, spices and tea, grapes and walnuts, many products and dishes became part of people's cuisine precisely thanks to these roads. The road's trace lives also in art. Ceramic masters in Samarkand used techniques that came from China. In Byzantine mosaics are found motifs of Persian ornaments. In Bukhara fabrics, one can see Chinese patterns, and in Persian miniatures, influence of Buddhist and Indian iconography. The Great Silk Road became not only a trade route but a thread of art that connected civilizations, creating a unique cultural fabric with no analogues. But perhaps most strongly of all, the road left a trace in the idea. The idea that the world can be connected. The idea that beyond the horizon are people with whom one can speak, trade, argue, love. In a world full of borders and conflicts, the road reminded of the possibility of dialogue and exchange. Today, when caravans long ago disappeared, the idea of the Silk Road continues to live. In recent decades, governments of different countries again spoke of a new Silk Road transport corridors that should connect China, Central Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. Projects of railways, highways, and pipelines bear the old name, reminding that in history there was already a moment when the world was connected by threads of roads. But as before, the most important thing on these roads is not goods but people, their stories, culture, hopes, and dreams. In the next part of this chapter, we will talk about how archaeologists, writers, and artists rediscovered the road for the world, how its image became part of world culture and entered the dreams of those who never walked Takomakon Sands but feel within themselves the call of distant roads. But for now, take a deep breath. Imagine how wind carries across the steppe forgotten words of old merchants, how in songs and tales sounds the rustle of a caravan going beyond the horizon. The past still sounds in us. Centuries have passed since the last large caravan disappeared beyond the horizon. Sand and time hid trails, caravanserais became ruins, cities' oases changed masters or disappeared entirely. But the memory of the Great Silk Road remained in human imagination like light from a distant star whose light reaches us through the thickness of time. In the 19th century, when European powers began actively exploring the East, interest in the road flared anew. Travelers, archaeologists, and diplomats again set out on the path. Now not for silk and spices but for knowledge, discoveries, lost history. Sven Hedin, Oral Stein, Paul Pelliot, Albert von Lecoq, these names became known thanks to expeditions to Central Asia. Along abandoned roads, they sought traces of past greatness. In sands, they found remains of Buddhist monasteries, caravanserais, trade stops. In Taklamakan desert sands, they found ancient manuscripts, Buddha statues, scrolls with texts in Sogdian, Chinese, Sanskrit. These finds opened to the world-forgotten cultures, reminded that once here passed a road that connected worlds. But not only archaeologists sought the road. Writers and poets, artists and musicians turned to the Silk Road's image as a symbol of human aspiration for knowledge and communication. In 20th century literature, the road became a metaphor for search and journey. In poems and novels, it personified life's road, the path to oneself, to truth. In cinema and music, its image returned as a reminder of a time when people walked toward each other, overcoming fear and the unknown. In the 20th-21st centuries, interest in the Silk Road received new breath. Archaeological discoveries continue. Thousands of tourists annually set out along ancient caravan routes, visiting Samarkand, Bokhara, Kashgar. For many, this is a journey not only physical but inner. Today, the Silk Road is not a road but memory and dream. Memory that once people were able to connect worlds. Dream that even today, despite wars and borders, humanity is capable of seeking dialogue and mutual understanding. In recent decades, at the international level, ideas appeared for reviving the road concept. Economic corridors, transport routes, cultural initiatives are being created. They are called the New Silk Road, although roads are now asphalt and caravans are replaced by trains and trucks. But behind this economic project also hides something else, an unconscious desire to return the sense of connection between people, to restore the old network where cities and peoples were part of one road. However, the true Silk Road was never only a road for trade. It was a road of meanings. A road along which walked ideas, beliefs, music, tastes, hopes. The road taught to listen and look, to accept the foreign without losing one's own. It was a road of tolerance and curiosity, risks and discoveries. Today, when borders again become walls, when the world seems divided, the memory of the Great Silk Road sounds especially clearly. It reminds that human history is a history of movement, exchange, meetings. In each of us is a particle of that great road. In our languages and traditions, in food, music, in books and stories we tell children, in the aspiration to understand others, to hear, to know. The road left a trace in humanity itself. And this trace will not disappear anywhere. In the conclusion of our lecture, we will remember that the Great Silk Road is not only about the past. This is a story that continues inside us. But for now, take a deep breath. Imagine how shadows of the past fall on the earth, how in the silence of night one can hear the distant rustle of a caravan and understand, the path continues. Conclusion. Now, when our road approaches its end, when the story slowly falls silent like caravan bells carried away by wind, I propose that you once more take a deep breath and look back. We with you have walked a long path. From the noisy markets of ancient Chongmen to Moose ruins, from starry nights over Pamir to Taklamakan sands. We walked together with merchants and pilgrims, philosophers and caravan guards. We heard the rustle of silk, the aroma of spices, road dust, conversations in dozens of languages. We saw how the Great Silk Road was born, grew, changed, survived wars and peace, rises and falls. We observed how it became not only a road of trade but a road of ideas, cultures, meanings. The path began as a thin thread laid by people who wanted to exchange access for needed. But with each year, with each step, it became larger and larger. It became civilization's pulse. And yet, like everything in this world, the path was temporary. Empires that held power over it disappeared. Caravans left. City walls collapsed. Roads were overgrown. But the road's history did not disappear. It continues to sound in our world. In city names, in legends, in spice aromas, in songs, in carpet patterns, in cuisine recipes, in fairy tales, and in our imagination. The path became part of us. It taught humanity something important, that true wealth is not in goods and gold but in the possibility to meet, to talk, to hear each other. In knowledge that beyond the horizon is someone else with a different language and faith but with the same human heart. Today we live in a different world. Our roads are faster, our borders stricter, our means of communication instantaneous. But sometimes it is precisely in this new, noisy, overloaded world that one especially acutely feels longing for those times when the path was long and unhurried, when meeting with the foreign was a holiday, and each story a treasure. The Great Silk Road reminds us that we are part of one world. That each person's history is also a journey, a road full of meetings and farewells, dangers and discoveries, joys and losses. And perhaps when you look at a world map, you will remember that under each city, under each road, under each name is hidden a story that began many centuries ago when the first merchants decided to take a risk and set out on the path. Perhaps you will hear how under the noise of the modern world sounds an old, forgotten rustle of a caravan that still walks through centuries. The path did not disappear. It became invisible, like history's breath. The path is inside us. And this night, when the story ends, and eyes grow heavy, and thoughts become smooth, I propose that you close your eyes and imagine night, desert, sky strewn with stars. Somewhere ahead, caravan lights flickering in darkness. Someone sings a quiet song. Camels, step by step, leave traces in sand. The path lies before you long, slow, full of mysteries and meetings. The path continues. And as you fall asleep, perhaps you will become part of this great caravan that never stops its journey. Good night. Thank you for your attention. Subscribe to the channel.